This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, Ryan Tripp with you here. As Tripp, we are down to 4. College football playoff semifinals here, approaching a little bit later on this week. Penn State taking on Notre Dame, Ohio State taking on Texas. We got a big preview here today on both of those games. Give you some keys and give you some predictions. Both those games we do get set for Thursday and Friday to decide who's in the national title game. We'll discuss a little Big Ten maybe supremacy. But I think it's important to start this podcast, Trip, because we're recording this on a Monday. And this is a different Monday than most. Not because we got 2 semifinal games, but also because the holiday season's over. And now really the reality of the work week is back. So I know for the last 2 weeks, a lot of listeners had no idea what day it was, right? With Christmas, with New Year's, Hanukkah in the middle of the week, no idea what day it is. So it is Monday. And for you especially, jet setting across where you're in Arizona, you're in frozen Chicago, getting ready to go down to sunny Miami. Just important to remind you, it is Monday. Where are we at from right now, Tripp?
I'm in State College for 32 hours. I was actually a couple of minutes late hopping on to record our pod today because I was trying to squeeze enough laundry in before that we hit the record button. But it's really nice to be home and to have slept in my own bed last night, and I will sleep in my own bed again tonight, albeit snowy State College. I'm guessing there's a little snow in the Big Apple this morning as well.
I'm looking at my window, and it is coming down. Actually, it's pretty nice. A nice little thin layer. But yeah, it is adding to the chilly aesthetic without a doubt. So at least when you're traveling, at least you'll be in sunny Miami. Get a little warmth, get a little tan. Not bad.
Well, I had the Maryland-Penn State game at the end of the regular season, and I thought, how could it possibly get colder than this? Then the SMU playoff game on December 21st. And I thought, how could I possibly be broadcasting at anything colder than this? And then the real feel sitting rinkside at Wrigley Field in the ultimate experience calling hockey on Friday night. I just have to tell you, it was so cool. It was so cool. Penn State was in the first base dugout. They came out of the first base dugout. Their locker room was in one of the clubs that wasn't in use for this hockey. It was called the Frozen Confines, which is a great name, a Big Ten hockey series at Wrigley Field. And they were fortunate to not be in the visiting clubhouse, because I'm not sure if you've ever been to Wrigley or anyone who's been to Wrigley or you hear about the lore of it. So the visiting clubhouse at Wrigley Field used to be the home clubhouse. But to get from the dugout to the clubhouse, you need to go up approximately 40 steps because it's not at ground level. So when the Cubs expanded their clubhouse, they switched because there's not room on the first base side. They moved to the third base side, and their clubhouse is more at field level. But the visitors' clubhouse is 40 steps, like really 3 stories up. So it was actually worked out for the team that they didn't have to go up into that clubhouse. I think Wisconsin and Ohio State used it over the weekend. But anyway, to come out of the dugout and then to walk across the infield to go to our vantage point to call the game, which was probably a couple of steps off of third base, sitting rinkside at Wrigley Field. And you look out where ice level, really cool perspective to call the game. And it ended up being every game that they played 4 games, 1 women's game, 3 Big Ten men's games. And every game was decided either by 1 goal in overtime or a shootout. So it was an awesome experience. But to look out and to see the National and American League, the manual scoreboard above the bleachers in center field, and they had the Big Ten hockey scores on there and the Big Ten basketball scores on there, and they were manually updating them. Also updating the Minnesota Virginia Tech Duke's Mayo Bowl game. Minnesota, pretty dominant performance for PJ Fleck. He's the one who ultimately gets the Mayo bath. And then there were 25,000 tickets sold for the game. And I'll tell you, there were at least 20,000 people there when I walked out the first time. And I'm not sure the cameras did it justice because they faced the outfield bleachers, and most of the people were probably you have a better vantage point from the second deck for hockey because the seats are so low to the ground for baseball. And because it's an older stadium, you don't have that real steep pitch that you have in a lot of modern stadiums today. But it was so cool to sit there and you turn and you look in one of the great venues in all of sport. But man, sitting there broadcasting with a real feel of zero, and I could hear it listening back to the game, my voice at the end, you could tell that I had been out in the elements. Now, I went in and warmed up during the intermission. We were fortunate enough to hire an intermission host for this game for the purpose of us going inside and warming up. You know, there were a couple of my colleagues in the Big Ten that said, "Oh, you guys are soft. You're going inside to warm up. We're going to sit out here." I'm like, no, I'm not soft. I'm just not stupid. Let's sit out here for 4 hours, because you think about setting your gear up, pregame, intermissions, and the games were long. They were long, but it was really cool. I know we've talked about how I think the Pinstripe Bowl is a really cool, unique bowl game. New York City, Yankee Stadium. Haven't been to Fenway, haven't experienced that bowl game, but I'm sure in many ways it's the same thing. And Wrigley, where Northwestern played some home games this year while they renovate and rebuild Ryan Field, it was a really cool sport experience to call hockey in that hallowed ground, the frozen confines of Wrigley Field. That was Friday. Then bus to Notre Dame on Saturday. Announced a game last night in South Bend at 5. I got home a little after 11, went to bed a little after midnight. And then I'll leave tomorrow out of Harrisburg to go to Miami, which is the warm reward. Not as warm as I was hoping, upper 60s, but that's the reward at the end of the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah, wow. I was going to say maybe 70s, possibly 80s. Oh, wow.
Yep,
Cold front down in Miami. But geez, whoever your Big Ten brother colleagues are that called you soft, when it's the real feel zero and you're out there like 7 for 3 or 4 hours, no heroes at that point. I don't care. All the rules go out the window. You do whatever you got to do to just stay alive, stay warm. So, man, Tripp has just been globe-trotting essentially all across the U.S. here.
So here's the key, and I'll speak from a sideline reporter, and I know we want to get into these matchups and talk about, but here's the key when you're out in the cold, at least that I've found. Thick leggings underneath. I still tried to wear some semblance of nice pants. 2 layers of socks, ski socks.
Okay.
Whether it's boots, shoes, boots preferable. Then you take the adhesive toe warmers and put them on the bottom of your foot, and they pretty much hold up for the entirety of your time outdoors. And then 2 or 3 layers of kind of that form-fitting, the tight, someone will just call it the Under Armour because I think they were the first ones to really make it, but 2 or 3 layers of that, heavy sweatshirt, heavy parka jacket, the full ski face mask that kind of pulls up and down over your nose, up to your eyes if you need it, and that covers your neck. And then the beanie, and then it's a layer, it protects your ears, and I have my headset on over that, plus gloves, plus hand warmers. And ultimately, I've made it through and haven't been super cold yet. I'll say by the time we got to the 8th round of a shootout on Friday night, I was looking for the finish line.
Someone win. I don't care who wins. Just please, someone score a damn goal. Get me the hell out of there. The quickest post game you'll ever see. Game over. All right, we'll see you next week. I'm out of here.
It was.
So we got you didn't freeze, Tripp. Man, what a. Yeah.
You wouldn't be able to be out in the elements like that. How are you still coughing?
I don't know. I went to the doctor last week. They said ride it out. I'm trying to ride it out. I rested all weekend. I didn't do anything all weekend. Usually rest is supposed to be good for you. Took a nap over the weekend. Still has not helped. Hopefully by Thursday this cough will be gone. But I mean, by this point, maybe after the national championship games when we'll finally get back healthy again. So I'm playing a little hurt. You are, at least it's seemingly thawed out. So here's we get ready on this Monday. Welcome back to work, everybody. Welcome back to reality. Really, we are here with you, getting set for what should be really 2 fun semifinal games. Before we get into the game strip here, we did talk about 2 Big Ten teams left, right, out of 4. And when you look at the Big Ten this season in terms of how Oregon played, Ohio State, Penn State, Indiana making the 12-team field, the Big Ten having the most playoff teams of any conference. You're seeing now even some bowl results where Alabama played all their starters in a bowl game against Michigan and lost. South Carolina played all their starters against Illinois, lost. When you look at the grip that the SEC has had on college football, it feels like now for decades. Does it feel like the tide is turning? Michigan won the national championship last year. Again, 2 Big Ten teams right now remaining. I would probably say we feel like the 2 Big Ten teams left have the best chance of winning a national title. So maybe get back-to-back Big Ten championships here for the first time. Tripp, for the first time in almost 60 years, or I guess over 60 years, since Michigan State went back-to-back in the mid-60s here. Does it feel like, in your opinion, the tide has turned where now all of a sudden when you talk about the best conference in college football, we're no longer talking about the SEC. We're talking about the Big Ten.
Pun intended by saying the tide has turned?
Oh, no, but now I'm going to try to sound smart and smooth. Yes.
It makes me wonder all these years, and I think the 14 playoff has solved a lot of those problems. But how much was it just a narrative about the Southeastern Conference? I personally don't believe it was. I think that they have had the best teams in college football for the last decade plus. And a lot of that can be directly attributed to the growth of the conference through their 3:30 slot and 3:30 window on CBS, which really helped propel them into the national spotlight. And the SEC, because the SEC schools have smaller athletic departments, you're looking at 15, 16, 17 varsity sports compared to Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State, really the 3 torchbearers for the Big Ten prior to the addition of the West Coast teams. They've been able to funnel more resources into their football programs, whereas in the Big Ten, you're getting all this TV revenue, but they're distributing it across 30, 31, 34 varsity sports, trying to remain competitive in all those areas. So I think there's a lot of reasons why. I also think college football is cyclical in nature. But I will say, I think the Big Ten's additions, the question I think a lot of people had, would it be an over-bloating of the conference or would it elevate the conference? And I think because of the current status of Oregon, Washington was the team that Michigan played last year in the national championship game. Still believe USC is an incredibly talented program in a big market that has really, really good players. And if you look at how they started the year and how they ended the year, where they did it and the conference they played, and UCLA in their footprint and the history and tradition of that school, I think what the Big Ten brought in, I think those schools add more value than what the SEC brought. And the SEC simply, with an 8-game conference schedule, created an imbalance in its league. Meanwhile, the Big Ten elevated its league, and the Big Ten is positioned better in the long run right now than the SEC. And it's funny, right? That narrative could have been completely different. SEC goes out and dominates bowl season, but the Big Ten goes 4-1 directly against the SEC head to head. And I think if you look at Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, Oregon, USC, I'll put in the group, Washington, I'll put in the group, you feel like these are all powerhouse programs, no signs of stopping with the money, resources, what's invested in them. Meanwhile, the SEC, a bunch of really, really good / elite programs, but you almost wonder if they've maxed it out a little bit. Like, how much more could they do? Meanwhile, it feels like the Big Ten has been playing catch-up in NIL, has been playing catch-up in paying its players legally, illegally, however you want to talk about it. But now that they can do it and there's rules for them to do it, it's always been going on. It's been going on everywhere, but maybe more to a greater extent below the Mason-Dixon line and in the South and in Texas and Oklahoma and in the Southeastern Conference. And now these Big Ten schools can do that, not just the elite ones, but the good ones. Hell, all of them. That's, to me, where it starts to feel like this pendulum is now shifting to the Big Ten. There's a lot that I just said there, but I know, like, I think it's so encompassing of all different levels of. I think it's a really complex discussion, but I agree with you.
No, it is. I think the biggest thing that you said that I agree with, it to maybe simplify it, is just like, I think now in this new era of college football, like with all the changes, NIL, transfer portal, etc., I think the Big Ten is best positioned to take advantage of it. I think it's not a coincidence, right, that this has come into college football the last 2-3 years, that like really now like teams are used to it and using it to their advantage. I don't think it's a coincidence that now you're seeing Big Ten teams get better and stronger and get closer to that elite level, and SEC teams start to get knocked down. We've seen a regression. I know Nick Saban retired, and that obviously impacts it. But even last year, I mean, Michigan beat Alabama, and Alabama was not exactly bulletproof going to the playoff last year. So even with Saban towards the tail end, Alabama lost some of that invincibility they had even 5 years ago, let's say. Georgia now has taken a step down where that team was not very good really at any point this season, despite a lot of talent. You're seeing a lot of these SEC schools that dominated for a while now starting to regress back to the pack, and now you're seeing Big Ten schools start to elevate themselves. I think in large part because if you're a college kid, right, a lot of talent in really two places, in the Southeast and on the West Coast. And so if you were a high school kid wanting to go to the NFL but also compete for a national championship for the last 20 years or so, Tripp, you really are only going to one area, and that's the Southeast. Whether that's Florida, whether that's, even Clemson, Florida State, but really for the most part, you're going somewhere in the SEC. And now all of a sudden with the ability to transfer, with the ability for schools to legally pay you money, now all of a sudden like going to Ohio State if you're a Florida kid or going to Penn State if you're a kid out of Texas is no longer like taboo or like abnormal. And so now I think you're seeing a lot of these Big Ten schools with resources available use them to their advantage, and they're setting themselves up, like you said, like those 6 schools you just listed. Even though for schools like Michigan who had a down year and USC right now kind of feels like they're sputtering, it does feel like they are really well positioned moving forward here to take advantage of the current landscape and continue to get better, where it looks like the teams that like Alabama and Georgia who used to have first round picks be third stringers for 2 or 3 years. Now all of a sudden those kids are saying, well, why should I ride the bench if I can go to Penn State or Ohio State or Michigan and play right away? A lot of kids are leaving, and now you're starting to see the spreading out and parity of talent, which I think is to the Big Ten's benefit, because before this new system, before an expanded playoff, before you could pay players, it was pretty hard to convince a kid from Florida to go to Columbus or Ann Arbor. Now it's something a lot easier.
And this is all probably an overreaction based on the first season of a 12-team playoff. And right, last year, Florida State probably deserved to be in a 4-team playoff, didn't get in. And with them not just completely folding this year, like that really hurt the profile of the ACC. I think the SEC and the Big Ten are both positioned to be incredibly successful. I'm really curious, what is the future of a Clemson? What's the future of a Florida State? What's the future of some of those premier schools that are in the ACC? Notre Dame as an independent has a great team this year. Where do they position themselves in this landscape moving forward? The Big Ten, certainly without having Texas and Oklahoma, those are 2 marquee brands. Well, does Coach Prime stay at Colorado? What does BYU add to that league? Certainly both of these conferences have established themselves as the 2 premier leagues. They're going to make all the decisions in the sport. And absolutely, heck, if they don't like the decisions that are made, they could very easily separate themselves. I still don't feel good about the long-term prognosis of college football. I think NCAA college football is in big trouble. I don't think it's going in the right direction. I think the portal and the ability for players to move as frequently as they do, I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think NIL is a good thing. I think there are so many elements to this that there's no restriction on, and it's the wild, wild west. And I still think college football is in big trouble. I think the sport's in trouble. I feel good about the way the playoffs have played out. I think it's been a success overall. Certainly need to change the seeding. So hopefully that brings optimism that this is a formula and a model for the sport, but it also still feels broken. And until the Big Ten and SEC ultimately get what they want, and when is enough money enough? Where you could ultimately not just ruin college football, but ruin all of college sports. Because if you don't have football at these schools that is a part of the NCAA model, what does that do to your volleyball, your wrestling programs, your women's basketball, your ice hockey programs? Men's basketball in the Power Four, college football in the Power Four, or maybe just the Big Ten and SEC. Yeah, it could survive, but I don't think you realize what you have till it's gone sometimes. And at some point, you have to stop being greedy and keep striving to get more and more and more and more out of it, because at some point, you're going to squeeze the lemon too far and there's not going to be any juice left.
Yeah, that goes basically centers around the entire debate of leadership, right? I think that's also part of the reason
Yeah.
why you had James Franklin last week talk about basically Nick
Yep.
Saban being the commissioner of college football.
Mhm.
That's the biggest thing college football needs right now, a leader, because it's all
Mhm.
conferences, all individuals pulling in all different ways to get what they want, and there's really no unity whatsoever. That is,
Yes.
we could do 5 podcasts on that without a doubt here about the future of the sport, how to improve it, et cetera, et cetera. But at least in terms of right now,
Mhm.
it
I
is
think that's
it is
good.
interesting.
It's good for us because we're gonna have something to talk about the entire
True.
offseason. Like, I think the movers and shakers in this sport all have powerful voices, but the 2 most powerful voices are the Southeastern Conference and the Big Ten. And ultimately, what is the model for success that those teams and those conferences, because of what they have proven, right? But here's the thing. The reason you have a 12-team playoff is for a Boise State to have a chance in a Fiesta Bowl, for an Arizona State to have the opportunity they had in a game they should have won against
Yeah.
Texas. Can't get off the field on a 4th and 13. That game's over. If they get off the field, they win it right there. That's why you have the playoff, and you want to crown a true and real national champion in the sport. And I think you always need to give everyone a chance to prove it. You can't just say, well, the Big Ten and the SEC are the 2 best. Here you go. Because as we've seen in the playoff, right? Georgia's out. They're the SEC champion. And
Yep.
there weren't many people debating, including us. We said, yep, Georgia, you look at their resume, watch how they play. Certainly they have some flaws offensively, but this is a darn good football team, really physical, great defense. But here we are. They're not in the Final Four. Tennessee got rolled by Ohio State. They're not in the Final Four. And Texas really shouldn't be in the Final Four.
Nope.
And the SEC would have been on the outside looking in. So do they really deserve 4 seats at the table guaranteed? And same thing, I'm sure in other seasons, you'll say it about the Big Ten. It's the question of these conferences. How do you balance the imbalances of the unbalanced schedules that you have and present the teams that deserve to be a part of this conversation the opportunity to at least be a part of the conversation? There's so many things at play that I think it's a real overreaction to say right now, yes, the Big Ten has taken over, or the Big Ten and the SEC, and it's everybody else. However, the way it's played out so far in this postseason, and when you look at the long-term sustainability of the way the programs, the upper echelon programs in the Big Ten are structured and built, and the resources and funding they have, I don't think it's a leap to say that, yes, the Big Ten now is the best conference in college football and is best positioned for continued success, especially with the leadership of their new commissioner, Tony Petitti, who's been on the sidelines at all of these games. Like, he's out in the elements standing next to me at the Penn State SMU game. I saw him at Wrigley. Wow. He seems like the leader the conference needs to stabilize things after they had just a disaster with Kevin Warren. And, the Big Ten is lucky he went to the Chicago Bears. The Chicago Bears are not. But Kevin Warren was not in a position to lead this conference through this era. And it seems like Tony Petitti is the guy to do it.
Props to him. I did not realize he was on the sideline for SMU or even at Wrigley Field. Tough guy. You're tough. He might be even tougher than that, because at least you're out there getting paid. I guess he's getting paid either way, but still.
Yeah.
He could have been in a suite for all we know. And he's out there braving the elements with guys like you, Tripp. Gotta respect that. Gotta love that.
That's a big thing to have his leadership in this conference. I think you look at his history, where he's been working as a TV executive, and his background and the effort he's made to get out, see the schools, know the key stakeholders in this. I think his leadership has been welcomed in the Big Ten. Kevin Warren was not a good commissioner. And look at the Chicago Bears.
Yeah. Enough said. You're right about that. Yeah. And even the state of the Big Ten when he was running it, you're very right about that. Part of how the Big Ten, right, I guess, kind of takes some of the power away from the SEC. Number one is money, and they're set with that in terms of TV contracts, but also it's winning, right? Getting national championships, kind of having your conference win a lot. And right now, Tripp, we are 2 games away from having an all Big Ten national title game in Ohio State, Penn State. How we get there, right, is by both winning this upcoming week. Let's start by previewing some of these games here. Let's start with the game you'll be at, Penn State and Notre Dame. The big question, and the big, one of the big storylines going into this game is injuries on both sides. Abdul Carter, right? Obviously, star linebacker, defensive end, edge rusher for Penn State. We'll see with his shoulder injury. And for Notre Dame, their running back, Jeremiah Love, got banged up against Georgia, did not return. I've seen videos on social media, him at practice, we're in a very bulky knee brace. Does not look like he's fluid whatsoever. There are going to be two major injury storylines going to this game for key starters on both sides here for Penn State and Notre Dame. Tripp, is there any updates we can get on Abdul Carter now that it is at least Monday and we are quick math here, 3 days away from the Orange Bowl at all?
Can you believe that we got 23 minutes into this podcast? This is what's great about doing a podcast with you, and I think our audience appreciates this. We're a little bit unscripted because we only had two bullet points to touch on before we got into the game previews. And don't worry, we're also going to have our second podcast this week. We're going to talk to someone from Texas, someone from Notre Dame on each side, and we'll give more of our analysis as well. So don't think we're skimping here on the national semifinals. Oh, did you ask a question?
You are a good filibuster. You know who needs you? Washington, D.C. All right, let me ask you this then, because James Franco basically said in his press conference last week or over the weekend, again, I don't even know what day it is. So he said at some point recently here that basically nothing is going to keep Abdul off the field. So it seems like he's going to play. Now the question is, right, effectiveness. Same thing for Jeremiah Love. It seems like he's going to play, but the question is going to be effectiveness. Let me ask you this. Who needs their star player more? In order to win this game, does Penn State need Abdul Carter more, or does Notre Dame need Jeremiah Love more?
Man, that's a really, really good question. And I think there were reports at out-of-state college that Abdul Carter did not practice yesterday, at least when the media was at the open practice viewing session. So I'll tell you, that's all I know. So Abdul Carter and Jeremiah Love, who's more important? Man, with Jadarian Price, I feel like Notre Dame, and because of how they're built offensively and so much of their running game also goes through Riley Leonard, the quarterback. I feel like Love is more replaceable. Not saying that he's not a great player and a difference maker. Now, Penn State has depth, and we saw Smith Vilbert and Max Granville and Amin Vanover, who played a great Amin Vanover played a great Fiesta Bowl, and then to still have a denied Dennis Sutton on the other side. It's not to say they don't have bodies that can replace Carter, but there is no duplicating a top 5 NFL draft pick. So I think Abdul Carter, his versatility, what he means, and his ability to be a game wrecker is the big. If either can't play or either isn't it's not just play. It's how close are you to being 100% of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think Abdul Carter would be a bigger loss than Jeremiah Love.
I actually think the opposite. I think Jeremiah Love is the bigger loss, in part because of the depth you just highlighted for Penn State. Now, again, still a top 5 pick. Abdul Carter is great. You did see in the game against Boise State, Penn State, their depth did a good job of shining. And I think when you look at how Notre Dame wins games, right, they win games predominantly on the rushing attack, led by Jeremiah Love and Riley Leonard. And while, like you said, Jadarian Price is solid, like he has over 600 yards rushing, he's no slouch. When you look at how Notre Dame wins, they really can't win passing the ball, right? So they are reliant offensively on rushing the football. If you take away one of the key guys from their rushing attack, I don't think Riley Leonard could sit back there 30 times and beat you. Versus when you look at Penn State, while Carter's the better overall player, they have good depth, and Penn State has different ways they could beat you. You know, if their defense is getting toasted, they still have the offense to keep up and I think outscore Notre Dame. I just think right now Penn State has multiple ways to win, and they are better prepared. Even though Carter's the better player, I think they're better prepared to replace his absence versus Love, where, if it's the Jadarian Price and Riley Leonard show, I feel pretty good if I'm Penn State about trying to slow them down versus, trying to replace Abdul Carter. I just think right now, while Carter's a better player, I think Love is so important to that offense, and they're so one-dimensional in terms of running the football. I mean, Riley Leonard had, 90 passing yards against Georgia? Like, the passing attack is not a threat at all. If they can run, I think they're in big trouble in this game on Thursday. Penn State showed they could stop the best running back in college football, and now it's the best rushing attack, right? There's more players to stop, but I trust Penn State defensively without Abdul Carter to have success more than I trust Notre Dame offensively if they have to play without or with a limited Jeremiah Love.
I think it's a moot point because I think both of them play.
Oh, I think both play, but playing and being effective, right, is obviously, as we know, two different stories. If Carter can only play 15 snaps or Love can only play 20 snaps, but he's basically gimping on one leg, playing and playing effectively, two different conferences. I agree. I think both play. How much, how effective is going to be the question that right now we don't know. Really, only time will tell. But if assuming both are not at 100%, I think Penn State's better equipped depth-wise and just overall how they win games-wise versus Notre Dame, where they do feel like they are kind of a one-trick pony offensively. And you take one of those big ponies out, I think they're in trouble.
Can I just tell you, looking at the matchup overall, though, real difficult one to handicap because I think the two teams are so similar in many, many ways, right? Both are going to play a physical game. Both have been able to run the ball with incredible success. You have two outstanding defenses that create turnovers. Notre Dame leads the nation with 31 turnovers gained this season, and they have scored 148 points off of those turnovers. I don't think Notre Dame played a great game against Georgia. I don't think they did at all, but it's a 6-3 game, and then Georgia should not backed up inside their own end late in the first half. I think they gave Notre Dame a freebie touchdown. Notre Dame creates the turnover, right? Scores, but Notre Dame ultimately scores 17 points in less than a minute, getting the kickoff return to start the second half. 17 points in less than a minute, and in a game that's a low possession, it's a slugfest between two defenses. Georgia made the big mistakes in the game. This game, ultimately, it sounds so simple, but between Penn State and Notre Dame, which team's going to make a mistake, if any, right? You can't have the big turnover. You can't have the big turnover that goes for Notre Dame, and that certainly goes for Drew Aller and Penn State. Who's going to be better on third downs? Notre Dame offensively is only converting 39% of their third downs. If you get them into 3rd and 5+, that takes the legs of Leonard and the run game out of it a bit. Now, he certainly can still create plays in the passing game with his legs being a primary threat in those situations. But I think it's who's better on third down, who's better on fourth down. That goes for offensively and defensively. And then which team, because Jeter's now started to make field goals again for Notre Dame, which team, when they get to the 20 and in, can take it, instead of getting 3, can get 7. And if you can score touchdowns in this game on the limited opportunities you have, those ultimately are the 3 biggest factors: turnovers, short yardage, and red zone, that decide it between the two teams. Because, like, even though Notre Dame's run defense is outstanding, you still feel like Penn State's going to be able to run the ball a little. And if they can, and they can create some balance with the ability to throw the football, and that might not be Warren, right? You expect this to be a very physical man defense on the outside. Their corners come up and play tight man. So how can those receivers win? I think it comes back to Singleton in the passing game again. Can they create enough? And you feel like Penn State has a slight edge in the pass game over Notre Dame. Okay, actually, I feel like Penn State has a big edge in the pass game over Notre Dame because the quarterback, Drew Aller. Not because of the receivers on the outside, but because of Warren, Singleton, and the quarterback, Drew Aller, and the ability of Amari Evans to make 1 or 2 plays with his speed. And Notre Dame's been susceptible. While they have a great pass defense, they will give up 1 or 2 big pass plays a game. And I truly believe, and this is not a homer, I think it's Penn State's game to lose. I think they are the better team. I think they're the more complete team. And I would be really surprised if Penn State does not beat Notre Dame.
I agree. And again, I think just looking at this objectively here, I'm going to equate it to actually a team that you love, the Eagles. And I know a lot of listeners also love the Eagles. The Eagles, to me, as the playoffs get set here, are my Super Bowl pick. In large part because I think they could beat you in multiple ways. They can run the ball against anybody. I think they can pass the ball successfully when they have to. They don't do it a lot, but I think they can if needed. And their defense is one of the, I would argue, maybe the best, second best in all of the postseason. They have different ways they could beat you, offensively, defensively. I look at that same thing here for Penn State against Notre Dame, where I think Penn State, like you said, I think they can have success running the football. I know Notre Dame's a really good run-stopping defense, but also, at least statistically, Penn State's played 2 top 15 rush defenses in SMU and Boise State and ran all over them, ran all over Oregon. You know, that run game really since Ohio State has taken it to the next level. The offensive line is even with some injuries, as playing at an extremely high level. Shout out Nolan Rucci for how well he has played, and is just really filled in nicely. That offensive line, to me, is rolling where it doesn't matter who they're playing. I think they're going to have success on the ground. Katron Allen and Nick Singleton are both working well with each other. I think Penn State can win this game running the ball. I think Penn State can win this game throwing the ball. I know the receivers are question marks. I trust Drew Aller a ton, but also, like you kind of said, Notre Dame is going to play a lot of man-to-man. Boise State did a lot of the same thing. They blitz a lot. They put a lot of their corners on islands. And you got one with Amari Evans. You watch that USC Notre Dame game at the end of the year. USC had a lot of success throwing the football. Now, their receivers are better than Penn State, but you're going to get opportunities. And to Amari Evans' credit, when he got his chance, he made it. Harrison Wells had a few decent catches, not a huge breakout game or a huge catch, but made some plays when he had to. Tyler Warren, like I said, just even with the defensive guys Notre Dame has, he's just a guy that's uncoverable. No matter who you put on him, he's just going to make plays. I trust Penn State's passing offense, even though statistically it is one of the best in the league, the Notre Dame's pass defense. I think they can win passing the ball, and I think they can win defensively because, like we said, if you're now facing this Notre Dame rush attack, which I'm not saying it's easy to stop, but they just stopped Ashton Jeanty, the best running back in all of college football. If you're able to do the same thing, keep everything in front of you, limit Riley Leonard. If Jeremiah Love's not 100% and limit him, Notre Dame's not beating you throwing the ball. They're not at all. So I look at this game. I think Penn State can win in 3 different ways. I think Notre Dame can win they can win running the ball, but I don't think that they'll be able to run the ball the way they have all season long. And the other way, like you mentioned, is turnovers. They have to win. I would say they have to be at least +2 in turnovers in order for Notre Dame to win.
This is not to discredit Notre Dame because a defense has to make plays. If you get turnovers, you create them, you make plays. So everyone wants to just point fingers at the offense. Well, sometimes it's because the defense is so good. And Notre Dame's defense is that good. It is that good. But it feels like the only way, to me, and maybe I'm undervaluing Notre Dame, I think they're an outstanding team. They've been as dominant as anyone in college football since week number 3. They are an outstanding football team. But in some ways, it feels like if Notre Dame wins, partially it's because Penn State beats itself by turning the ball over, by being unsuccessful. Like, there's so many routes. I agree with you to Penn State winning, whereas it's harder to find the avenues. They're there, but Notre Dame has to do it in a way that's not flashy, that's gritty, and you grind it out. And all the plays that have small margins, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, red zone, those have to go Notre Dame's way to win. You said one thing, though, that struck me. You talked about the blitz of Boise State. They had 4 sacks in that game. Penn State had only given up 14 all year. Al Golden, who's been probably should get the Broyles Awards, Assistant Coach of the Year. They gave that out already. I don't even know who won. Did he? Google it.
I will look that up for you.
Yeah, Google that really quick. Al Golden's defense does not blitz a lot. Will Notre Dame go a little bit outside its norm to blitz Penn State because Penn State did not fare well against the Boise blitz and didn't have any answers for it, which was surprising. So you have to wonder if Notre Dame will change some of its tendencies to blitz Penn State more because Penn State did not blitz a lot. And then for Penn State, right, one of the things Notre Dame, how do you handle defensively when your eyes are going all over the place with all the window dressing from Andy Kotelnicki? That has given their defense some trouble. So that's the cat and mouse I see between the outstanding offensive coordinator of Penn State and the outstanding defensive coordinator of Notre Dame.
They have not yet announced the Broyles Award. It'll be announced on February 13th. Al Golden is one of the 5 finalists. Also in the Big Ten, Bryant Haynes, DC for Indiana, is amongst those as well. And Texas's defensive coordinator, Pete Kwiatkowski, is also a finalist. So obviously we'll get to him in a little bit here. We're previewing Ohio State, Texas. But to your point, I'm with you. Al Golden's been outstanding for this defense. Also, too, another thing to look out for, we're not mentioning yet, trickery. You saw it against Georgia, right, where Notre Dame lined up in their own end, punt formation. All of a sudden, they say hike, everyone runs off the field, offense runs on, able to draw Georgia off sides, get a free first down, keep the drive going. Marcus Freeman's aggressive. Whether it's faking it, whether it's kind of pulling stuff like that. If you're Penn State, you have to be, and they've done a good job of being on their P's and Q's and not being really caught sleeping. I think James Franklin's done a really good job of always having his guys aware of that. That's one where I think if you're to add to it, if you're Notre Dame, you got to pull off some sort of fake, some sort of trickery in order to kind of get momentum on your side. It does feel like the more we talk about it, right? It does feel like this is a game Penn State has to make multiple mistakes in order to lose, and Notre Dame needs a few bounces of the ball to go their way in order to win. To Penn State's credit, they have not really beaten themselves really since the Ohio State game. They've done a great job of taking care of business. I know the competition has not been anywhere near the level of a team like Notre Dame they're going to face since outside of Oregon, but they've done a really good job right now, I think, of playing good football and not beating themselves. As long as that continues, I think they can win this game here. And I think they do advance the national championship game. I think James Franklin deserves a lot of credit right now for how sound the team is playing. I think also what helps too, Tripp, is you look at the first two opponents, right? Penn State's played. You could talk about, and people have discredited them, and I get it to a sense. SMU, Boise State, easiest path, I get it. I'm not going to try to litigate, impressive wins. But I think why those two games are important for this one here is look at the style of play. Where SMU had a very mobile quarterback in Kevin Jennings, and they did a great job of keeping him contained and always keeping him in front of them. They did a great job with their speed of never getting behind. And then you face the power rushing attack of Ashton Jeanty. It did a great job rounding to the football, tackling in space, and being physical against a very physical running back. Notre Dame is like a hybrid, right? They're physical. Their offensive line are maulers, but they have speed. They have physicality. And I think it's a blend of the first two teams, which I think works to Penn State's advantage because now this is something, it's not a rushing attack they haven't seen before. It's not a scheme they haven't seen before. They're prepared, and I think they've proven so far, you could argue the competition, but I think they've proven that when they have to be physical defensively, they can. When they have to use speed and go sideline to sideline, they can. And so that's also another reason why I feel confident in this defense in slowing down one of the best rushing attacks, a top 10 rushing team in Notre Dame, because they've proven it in different games before that they can handle the speed and physicality needed to have success.
I don't know what to say next. But seriously, I don't know if we're oversimplifying the game and oversimplifying the matchup. I don't think we're being biased in homers. I've watched a lot of Notre Dame, and they make big plays when they need to. And they're an outstanding team. They are an outstanding team. But that feels like, did we just preview the Orange Bowl in less than 15 minutes?
This is why I'm glad we're having someone from Notre Dame on later this week, because maybe we're missing something, right, that they have seen that we haven't. But it's like, to your point, like we just laid it out, and I think we've kind of hit on everything so far in the last 15 minutes. And you look at the spread, Notre Dame's a favorite. Like, what are we missing something here?
And that's what I'm maybe perplexed by. But this isn't like, and maybe we should have had a 5-minute preview of the Rose Bowl when you look at how it played out. But that's one where you're looking at all those different positions and matchups. And well, you got Tez Johnson, you got Terrence Ferguson, the tight end, and then Gabriel, and then their O-line, and Ohio State's O-line, and the D-lines, and the linebackers. For this, I think personnel-wise, ultimately, the teams are pretty similar. Good O-lines, good D-lines, great defenses, good coaches. No spectacular wide receiver that's a Jeremiah Smith or Emeka Egbuka in the game.
Right.
Quarterbacks, Aller's a better thrower, but uses his legs effectively. Leonard, they don't pass a lot, but can really run. And he's a great leader, and he's been through it. It really comes down, you start looking statistically, well, where's the difference? Not a ton there either. So it really is, some matchups are just easy to simplify and say, here's what it is. If this is how it plays out, this is how it's going to play out, and that team's going to win. And I think we're at the point of the year, like there's always these discussions when you get to a big game. Well, who's the unsung hero going to be? Who's going to be the Corey Clement?
Nice call.
Super Bowl 52 reference. Who's going to be the Malcolm Butler? But oftentimes, especially in college football, whose best players are better than the other team's best players? And to me, whichever of these units that are all really good players, whichever is better. And I think Penn State with an Abdul Carter, with a Jalen Reed, and a Drew Aller and a Tyler Warren and a Nicholas Singleton, I think those best players play better than Notre Dame's. And I think their overall ability to win, as you said, win in different ways. I think that I think that puts Penn State in the national championship.
I agree. And to Penn State's credit, we've talked about it recently here. In these big games, they've done a great job of getting their best players to football. Yeah. And I'm with, like, in these playoff games, it's been Tyler Warren, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen.
Yeah.
Drew Aller to an extent at some point. The defense.
Oh, my God.
Like,
Katron Allen averaging over 7 yards per carry in the playoffs. I mean, for a guy who I think played well during the regular season, but I didn't even know he had this gear to him.
He looks like Barry Sanders out there. It's crazy. And it's like, I think Penn State has
he looks
more
like
better
Marshawn
players.
Lynch. He looks like Marshawn Lynch.
Nice. All we need is a crotch grab as he's going into the end zone. That'd be pretty sweet. Probably draw a flag, but that'd be pretty sweet. So before we get to then Ohio State, Texas, let me just ask you this then. Mm-hmm. What do you think the final score would be? Notre Dame's the 1.5 point favorite here. We both are obviously on Penn State. Is it like is it a 7-point win, 10-point win? Like, what are you thinking here?
27-14, 27-17, something like that. Late
digits,
touchdown opens it up. And there's so many people that can't wait to listen to our podcast next week and hear us just eating crow, because they're going to be like, these two Penn State idiots. They're going to be saying worse, but
yeah, and we'll keep it clean, family friendly.
It's weird. Here. It's weird, and I think we do a really good job of staying unbiased and neutral and just breaking it down as we see it. There've certainly been times where we feel like Penn State would win or lose, and I think we've been pretty accurate throughout the year. I'll tell you, as a lifelong, like, I'm going to take the professional hat off here for one moment. As a lifelong fan, an alum, someone who's worked with the program directly, been around the program coaches, and I really have always believed in them. But to be sitting here and have this blind faith and optimism and confidence going into this one, I'm not saying to win the national championship, but going into this one,
right, to get there,
it feels weird. And I'll be honest, I don't see them losing. I just don't see them losing this game. And it's not a feeling I've had often, whether it's as a like in my fandom, it's not a feeling I've had before. And it's really unique. It's really odd, but I truly believe that they're going to win the game.
That's the feeling in you, though. Yeah. Always negative, always expecting the worst to happen, never believing.
Nope. There's one other time when the Eagles beat the Patriots to win the Super
Bowl. Okay, so the faith is little by you, but when it does shine, we'll say usually pretty accurate. I would agree, by the way, with your prediction, like a 10, like a double. I think it feels like a 10, 13-point win here for Penn State. Maybe they get a late touchdown and pull away, but it does feel like a game where maybe it's close, one score for most of it, and they kind of pull away in the fourth quarter. I think they'll be in control for most of this game here, dictated on their terms. Like I said, as long as they don't beat themselves, it does feel like this is a game they'll win, and they will advance to the national championship game. So Tripp and I, those are our picks. Again, we'll have a Notre Dame expert on the pod later this week to kind of break it down from the Irish perspective, see how they scout Penn State, see maybe there's something that aren't seeing.
Not just an expert. Tony Simeone, the play-by-play voice of the voice of the Irish, will be on the show.
Who knows the program better than almost anybody else. Very excited for Tony to join us. We'll also have Fozzie Whitaker, former Texas player, and does a great job. Actually, I believe he does sidelines like you, Trips, and how you two can swap some notes about some sideline reporting. He'll join us also later this week to preview the Texas perspective here as they do take on Ohio State. And speaking of that game, Tripp, it's interesting. Steve Sarkisian made some news over the weekend when talking about Ohio State. He called them the best program in college football. He's kind of playing a little bit of the underdog card. No one's giving us a shot. Let me just ask you this here. Do you agree with him? Like, is there any debate of Ohio State being the best team? And Sark is kind of making it seem like it's almost David versus Goliath. Like, do you think there's a a big advantage for Ohio State over Texas going to the Cotton Bowl here?
Well, it still is Texas out of the SEC in a blue blood program. So I have a hard time saying David versus Goliath. But if you look how Ohio State is played right now, I don't care who they're going against, Oregon, Penn State, Notre Dame, Georgia, Texas, right? It feels like everyone and then Ohio State, the way that they've performed so far in their 2 playoff games. So yeah, I agree with Steve Sarkisian. Look at the spread, right? They're like a touchdown underdog as we sit here on Monday morning recording this podcast. Here's the one thing he hasn't accounted for. The game being played at AT&T Stadium in Dallas, Texas, and this being a Texas home game in a national semifinal. It will be Ohio State has a national fan base. They travel extremely well, and they have the means to travel extremely well. But if you're thinking that this is going to be 50-50, it's not. It will be 75-25 in favor of Texas in terms of percentage of fans in that stadium. So I have a hard time playing that card because it is Texas, and they were one of the best teams in college football all year long. But it does feel like Ohio State versus the field right now going into this national semifinal.
I agree. And part of the reason is just because when we look at Texas, right, we know how well Ohio State's offense is playing. And Texas, I think, is defensively the best. That is definitely so far the best defense they'll play in this postseason. I think Texas is better than Tennessee. And as we saw, definitely better than Oregon. So this is, I think, Ohio State's offensively, at least, their biggest challenge in this playoff. But I think on the other side, one of the reasons why I feel so confident, I think a lot of people do in Ohio State is, I don't know about you, Tripp, like Quinn Ewers to me is so maddening. He leaves so much to be desired, where he can start out well. And I think he has, like, just from an arm talent perspective, like he could arguably be the most talented quarterback in the playoff, but he rarely plays like it. And as you saw in the Arizona State game, he started off hot. At the 2-play drive, all of a sudden, wow, Texas jumps on him. You get the power turn, was 14-0. This game's over. Like it's over. And then all of a sudden, Texas's offense for 2.5 quarters goes into a lull, allows Arizona State to claw the way back in the game. If you go into a 2.5 quarter lull, which, by the way, that's Texas has done that basically all season long. They have rarely put teams away. They have rarely started off hot and continue that. They almost every game, it feels like, go into a 2.5 quarter stinker. Good luck trying to slow down Ohio State's offense.
Texas has no third quarter touchdowns in their last 6 games. In this game, they're going to have to keep up with Ohio State. They're going to need Ewers and that offense to put together 4 quarters to keep pace with Ohio State. But I agree with you. Like, you look at that game against Arizona State, not only was it the throw on 4th and 13 back against the wall, season on the line, and to hit an open receiver off your back foot, back of the end zone to extend the game. Ewers marched them right down the field to get in field goal range for a field goal they shanked to win at the end of regulation.
Twice. Twice. Yeah. I mean, no, you're right. But between the first quarter and, like you said, the end of the fourth quarter, those 2.5 quarters there, he was terrible. He threw a key pick that allowed Arizona State back in the game. And I'm with you. You do that against Ohio State. They're putting up, I think, 30 in this game, no matter what, Ohio State's offense. With how well they're playing, even though Texas's defense is good, I have no idea. I can't see a path right now for Texas scoring at least 30 with how well this defense is playing for Ohio State.
And I think Ohio State, the ability to match Caleb Downs up or their linebackers, really anyone in that secondary, Latham Ransom on the tight end. Gunnar Helms had 9 catches, 133 yards, and 2 touchdowns in the Peach Bowl. Ohio State took Terrence Ferguson out of the game plan for Oregon. They did a great job they're the only team to have stopped Tyler Warren this year of Penn State. I think that takes away the most reliable target and probably the best target for Quinn Ewers in this game. I think Texas does have speed and physicality on the outside where they could create some big plays in the passing game, but that's against a very physical Ohio State secondary. You're not going to be able to get a run off the line like maybe you could against an Arizona State secondary. So as you start going into the matchup further, the same way we started doing that Penn State-Notre Dame preview here, right? Texas freshman defensive end Colin Simmons. Great player. Sean Alexander, freshman of the year, 9 sacks, 14 tackles for loss. But after Donovan Jackson just shut down Tennessee's pass rush, Oregon had no sacks, and they have Jordan Birch and can you say it for me?
Ui Ungalale.
Thank you. And how can you not, like, right now, an Ohio State offensive line that was a question coming into the playoffs? I don't have a question about them right now. Like, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. So finding that path for Texas to match Ohio State when they haven't put together 4 quarters all season. I mean, look, they fell behind fast against Georgia.
Twice? Well, and maybe not the second time in the SEC title game, but at least the first matchup. Yeah, no, you're right.
You can't allow that against Ohio State. I don't think they're consistent enough to hang with the Ohio State the way that they're playing right now.
I agree. And I think if you're Ohio State, I think what you're going to see offensively in this game is a lot of what you saw against Tennessee, where they threw the ball early to set up the run. Texas has a good run stuffing defense, and they have a good defensive line. Barron Sorrell is unblockable on the end. I think he's the best defensive end they're going to face so far in these 3 games. But how you get him chasing, how you keep Texas defense on their toes is by, I think, doing what they did against Tennessee. Passing early, quick passes. Again, Tripp, it's no coincidence here. Ohio State's offense is clicking the last 2 games against 2 good defenses, in part because they're getting Jeremiah Smith the ball. And all of a sudden, when 3-4 sets of eyes have to be on number 4, Emeka Buka's one-on-one, Carnell Tate's one-on-one, and now all of a sudden that run game opens up because you have 7 guys selling out for the pass, then now the offensive line gets more advantageous situations to block. I think the passing game here is going to set up the run. Texas's defense is good, and they are, I think, good on all 3 levels. But with how well right now Ohio State's clicking offensively, I think you're going to see them throw to set up the run. And also, too, another key here that you saw, like Texas defense got worn down in the 4th quarter, right? You could look at Cam Scadaboo and his numbers and say, oh, wow, Texas's run defense is not very good. I think they were tired. And part of the reason why they were tired was because Texas's offense did not sustain drives. You know, in the times they scored a little quickly, but they were not able to go on 10-play drives. So that, I mean, you look at in regulation, I think it was like 37 or 38 minutes so Arizona State had the ball. If Ohio State's able to manage the clock like that, and now for the 2nd straight game, get Texas on their toes and leave that Texas defense on the field for almost 2/3 of the game, I don't know how the Longhorns have an answer. I really don't.
Unless Ohio State goes back into a shell offensively and loses the rhythm and the swagger that they've called the games with the last couple of weeks, maybe Texas gets a stop or 2 early and causes Chip Kelly and Ryan Day to second guess themselves. Maybe Jaden Blue breaks one for Texas. I think it's really, really hard to see Texas, or maybe even anybody right now, be out of the 3 teams left. The team that has the best shot to compete with Ohio State is the team that's proven that they've played them close every single time for the last decade, and it's Penn State. I think Ohio State, unless they play Penn State in the national championship, I think they cruise. I think they cruise in this one. I think they would cruise against Notre Dame. And the way they're playing right now, it's hard to pick against them against anybody. But this is an Ohio State team that, man, things can really change fast in the course of 32, 33 days.
You ain't kidding about that. Last thing I want to say here, because I think it is like, I think if we said, hey, Ohio State is a quarterback advantage over Texas, even like a month, 6 weeks ago, I think a lot of people would say that's crazy. But what's interesting too about Quinn Ewers, kind of going back to where we're kind of talking about the maddening aspect, and you just mentioned Blue and Weiser.
Against his old team.
That's true. I actually forgot about that. You're right about that. Revenge game for Quinn Ewers. But like, it is interesting. Like, when Texas can't run the football, you would think like, okay, put the ball in Quinn Ewers' hand. That's a good thing. The more he's asked to pass, the worse he actually is. Like, you look at the season stats for Texas. They averaged 35.9 points per game, and Quinn Ewers' season passer rating is 150. Well, when you look at when Quinn Ewers is asked to do more, and he has 30 or more pass attempts in a game, Texas's points per game drop from 35 to 26, and his passer rating drops from 150 to 141. So it is one of those things where if you are Ohio State, you stop the run. And I think what we saw against Arizona State's the anomaly where Quinn Ewers did play well, at least statistically. But again, I think that 2-quarter lull is not going to work against Ohio State. But if you are able to make them one-dimensional, Quinn Ewers has proven to you, he is not a guy that can carry this offense on his shoulders. And again, Tripp, like kind of what we're talking about here with Penn State Notre Dame, the more we talk about it, the more you look into the matchups, the more you look at how both sides of the ball is playing for Ohio State. I don't know how they lose this game. I'm not sure how it's within 2 touchdowns.
I think they got to get that home field advantage. My question for you, do we see Arch Manning at all in the Cotton Bowl?
Oh, good question. I would say yes, just because Sark has done it before. He did it in that Georgia game in the regular season, now albeit it was for like 3 drives and then went back to Ewers after halftime. but he showed already he's not afraid to panic and put Arch in. This is it. Like, there's no going back. Burn the boats. I don't think Ewers is back next season, no matter what, whether he wants to come back or whether he goes to the draft. So I think at this point, you don't have to worry about disrupting the quarterback room in the offseason. I think so. I don't think it'll be in the first half, but I think if you're looking at if Ohio State has like a 13-point lead at halftime and it's 21, I don't know, what would that be? 21-7-ish, 21-3, and the Texas offense is not doing much. I think so. Do you think he makes the move? I didn't think about that. It's a really fascinating question. I think we see him.
I do think we see him at some point because I do think Texas will be behind in the game. So yes, I think we'll see him too. That's what we're on the same page a lot today again. Little frightening.
Now we were both on the same page for the Oregon-Ohio State game. That did not work out well. We were on the same page for the Penn State-Boise State game. That worked out well. So we are like 50-50 here in terms of just in total agreement, things going as we predict. So, I mean, if that's the case, that means at least one Big Ten team is losing, which I don't love those odds, but it does feel like we're going to go 2 for 2 here.
First year, still enrolled podcast. We're destined, right, for an all Big Ten national championship. I mean, our friends at Odyssey will be saying, we knew it. We knew it.
And exciting, if we do get an all Big Ten national championship, Tripp and I will be in person. We'll be in Atlanta covering for you. I feel like that is destiny. Like we deserve, I don't say deserve, that kind of feels, I don't like that word. It feels like we are destined with how this first season ends. And people are saying maybe the uptick of the Big Ten, coincidence or not, coincided with the start of the Still Enrolled podcast.
So that concludes this week's episode of the Still Enrolled podcast. We'll have a game preview we're going to record over the next couple of days. We'll have Tony Simeone, the play-by-play voice of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and Fozzie Whitaker, former Texas running back, now works as part of the broadcast team for the Texas Longhorns. And we'll get that to you. Are you going to put it out Wednesday or Thursday?
Wednesday. Yeah, we'll give it a little bit of shelf life here. Wednesday gets you set for Thursday's Orange Bowl and Friday's Cotton Bowl. So still plenty of shelf life there, plenty of time to absorb it, get ready for the games.
And we're not going to wait till Monday, Saturday morning, we will have for you a recap of the national semifinals, which
hopefully a happy one.
Right? I just realized I have a hockey game on Friday night, so I'm gonna have the iPad up showing the Ohio State.
So you're going to Miami. We're recording this on Monday. You're going to Miami on Tuesday. Obviously covering the game Thursday, and then flying back to State College to call a hockey game Friday night. This has been the month of Tripp. Let me tell you, freaking flyer miles, man. You are set you got 3 free trips coming your way.
I get paid by the game. So if there's a game, I'll be there.
Well, it's in the freezing cold, or in this case, sunny Miami. Tripp will be there, no doubt about it. Thank you, as always, for listening, tuning in, trusting us to give you the best insight we possibly can. Like Tripp said, we'll be back on Wednesday with another preview from basically behind enemy lines and a special weekend edition. Semifinal reaction Saturday morning. We'll push that out all weekend as well. So in case you missed it, don't worry. It'll be on your feeds. It'll be on social media. So make sure you're following on social media. Make sure you're subscribing on YouTube and wherever you do get your pods. Stay warm. Enjoy this week, and we'll talk to you on Wednesday right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.